The Galactic Council had ruled the stars for over 10,000 years. They were the architects of civilization, the undisputed masters of warfare, and the gatekeepers of technological progress. In their eyes, the younger races were little more than primitive children playing with fire, especially humanity. Earth was a backwater world on the fringes of the known galaxy, a species that had barely scratched the surface of interstellar travel. When the Council first encountered the Terrans, they did not see a threat. They saw an opportunity, another species to assimilate, to control, to shape in their image. But humans had a habit of defying expectations. At first, the Council had dismissed Earth's attempts at warships as laughable. The designs were inefficient, crude by galactic standards, oversized reactors, redundant weapon systems, and a bizarre obsession with kinetic weaponry, as if humanity had never outgrown the idea of throwing metal at their enemies. The other species of the Council built warships that danced gracefully through space, armed with energy-based weapons that struck with pinpoint precision. Humanity? Humanity built armored behemoths that tore through battlefields like ancient juggernauts, defying every convention of modern warfare. And so, the Council laughed. They laughed when the first human warships entered Council-controlled space. They laughed when Earth requested a seat at the table, demanding recognition as a sovereign power. They laughed when humanity's diplomats warned that Terran fleets would not be controlled, that Earth would never kneel. And then, they stopped laughing. The Council's response was swift and brutal. They declared an embargo, cutting off Earth from trade and technology. They sent a fleet to blockade the Sol system, surrounding humanity's homeworld with warships, daring them to resist. Humanity had been given an ultimatum: disarm, surrender, and become a vassal state, or face annihilation. The Council had done this 1,000 times before. No species had ever resisted for long. But humans? Humans were different. That was when Earth revealed the prototype. The ship had no name, no classification in the Galactic Council's records. To the untrained eye, it was just another Terran warship, angular, bulky, unrefined. The Council's analysts dismissed it before they had even finished their assessments. What they didn't know was that this ship was something entirely new. It wasn't just another prototype. It was the culmination of decades of secret development, a weapon designed not just to match the Council's technology, but to surpass it in ways they could not yet comprehend. When the Council's fleet arrived in Sol space, they expected an easy victory. They had brought over 100 warships, battlecruisers, dreadnoughts, carriers armed with squadrons of automated drone fighters. They had annihilated entire civilizations with half that number. They did not expect resistance, they did not expect a fight, and they certainly did not expect what came next. The prototype ship moved into position, alone. No fleet behind it, no reinforcements, just a single vessel facing an armada. The Council commanders hesitated for only a moment before they opened fire. Dozens of energy beams lanced through space, seeking the lone Terran ship. But something was wrong. The targeting systems flickered. Lock-ons failed. Weapons that had never missed in 10,000 years of war suddenly lost their precision. The ship was moving. No, not just moving. It was unpredictable. It wasn't teleporting, but it wasn't behaving like any known spacecraft. It was rewriting the rules of engagement in real time. The Council's battle-hardened admirals scoffed. Some experimental jamming field, they assumed. Some last-ditch effort to stall the inevitable. They compensated. They adjusted their aim. They fired again. Nothing hit. The prototype ship was no longer where they thought it was. In the span of milliseconds, it had shifted, accelerating at impossible speeds without inertia, without drift. The Council's ships, some of the most advanced vessels in the galaxy, were suddenly obsolete. And then the prototype returned fire. A single shot, not a missile, not a beam weapon, not anything the Council's warships had been built to counter. It was something else entirely. The moment it struck, the lead battlecruiser simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris. 1 second, it was there. The next, it was gone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Panic spread through the enemy fleet. Commands were shouted, orders were given. But nothing made sense. Tactical readouts failed to explain what had happened. The Council's admirals had fought countless battles, had faced hundreds of species, but they had never seen anything like this. And this was only the beginning. The silence did not last long. The Council fleet had been trained for war, and war was what they intended to bring. The destruction, no, the erasure of their lead battle cruiser sent shockwaves through their command structure, but discipline held. Within moments, new firing solutions were being calculated. Fresh orders were shouted across the vast comm channels of the fleet. This was not the first time a species had tried to resist the will of the Council. They had seen desperation before. They had seen civilizations throw their most advanced weapons at the Council's fleets, hoping for a miracle. And every time, those civilizations had been crushed under the weight of overwhelming firepower. The Council's admirals knew only one way to respond to resistance: overkill. If this Terran prototype possessed some unknown weapon, then the logical response was to overwhelm it. They gave the order. Every ship in the fleet locked onto the Terran vessel and fired. Space itself burned. Plasma lances, antimatter torpedoes, hyper-accelerated mass drivers. Hundreds of weapons discharged in perfect synchronization, unleashing the kind of firepower that had turned entire planets to slag. A storm of death raced toward the lone human warship. In that moment, there was no conceivable way it could survive. There was simply too much energy, too many projectiles. It should have been incinerated, reduced to atoms. But it wasn't. The ship did not evade. It did not activate shields, nor did it launch countermeasures. It did something no warship had ever done before. It absorbed the attack. A faint shimmer flickered around the hull as the incoming energy vanished, drawn into the structure of the vessel itself. Mass-based projectiles that should have shattered against the armored plating were instead swallowed by an unseen force. The prototype remained unharmed, untouched, as if the most powerful fleet in the galaxy had just fired blanks. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of fear. Across the command decks of the Council's warships, panic began to creep in. Their weapons had failed. The one thing they had relied on for millennia, their overwhelming technological superiority, had just been rendered meaningless. And then the prototype retaliated. It did not fire a conventional weapon. It did not launch missiles, nor did it use energy beams. Instead, the ship pulsed. A ripple, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, expanded outward from its hull, spreading in all directions. At first it seemed harmless, a mere distortion in the fabric of space. But then, systems began to fail. Shields collapsed. Targeting computers rebooted. The Council's warships, engineered with the most advanced technology in the known galaxy, suddenly found themselves defenseless. That was when the killing began. A second pulse, more focused this time. A beam of nothingness lanced out from the prototype's hull, striking a Council dreadnought. The ship did not explode. It did not break apart. It simply folded inward, collapsing as if reality itself had given up on maintaining its existence. One moment, it was there. The next, it was a rapidly shrinking singularity, consuming itself into oblivion. And then another ship fell. And another. The Council fleet, once an unstoppable force, was now in utter disarray. Some ships tried to flee, their captains realizing that this was no longer a battle. It was an execution, but it was already too late. The prototype ship moved with impossible speed, positioning itself wherever it needed to be, cutting off escape routes before they could even be formed. The admirals, the same ones who had dismissed humanity as a minor nuisance, were now screaming into their comms, demanding answers. What was this weapon? How was it possible? What had humanity created? The truth was, they would never understand. This was no mere technological breakthrough. The prototype was something else entirely. It was a declaration, a warning. For centuries, the Galactic Council had ruled through fear. They had crushed resistance before it could rise, had ensured that no species ever threatened their control. They had viewed themselves as the masters of the stars. But now, they were learning a painful truth. Humanity had never needed their approval. Humanity had never been inferior. They had been waiting. And now, They were ready. The prototype warship moved through the remains of the battlefield like a specter, untouchable, unstoppable. It did not communicate, did not gloat, did not explain itself. It simply continued its work, eliminating ship after ship with cold, surgical precision. The Galactic Council had come to crush humanity. Instead, they had awakened something far worse. The battlefield was no longer a place of strategy or war. It had become a massacre. The prototype warship, still silent and unyielding, wove through the shattered remains of the once mighty Council fleet, moving with a grace that seemed unnatural for something of its size. It was not following a predictable pattern, nor was it bound by the limitations of inertia or traditional spaceflight. It was something more, something different. The few remaining functional warships of the Council scrambled to adjust. Their admirals, once assured of an easy victory, now barked desperate orders across flickering comms, their voices laced with something they had never known before: fear. They had watched entire capital ships vanish, consumed by the unfathomable technology wielded by the human prototype. And they still had no idea how it worked. But they had to act. A new strategy was hastily put into motion. If their weapons were useless against this anomaly, then perhaps another approach was needed. Across the Council fleet, shipboard AI systems reallocated processing power, analyzing every recorded millisecond of the battle, trying to make sense of the impossible. Some hypothesized that the Terran vessel was exploiting subspace instabilities, using them to manipulate matter at a quantum level. Others suggested the ship's hull was composed of an exotic material that absorbed energy through unknown physics. But none of the theories mattered if they couldn't counter it. One desperate admiral, a veteran of 1,000 campaigns, ordered the activation of Tesseract Protocol, a last resort maneuver never before needed. Across the remaining fleet, powerful reality-disrupting devices were primed and detonated. These weapons, considered the pinnacle of the Council's technological supremacy, tore open artificial rifts in the very fabric of spacetime. They were designed to consume entire planets, crush enemy ships under the force of collapsing dimensions, and erase anything caught in their grasp. The battlefield shattered. A swirling vortex of fragmented space expanded, distorting physics itself. Stars seemed to stretch and twist. Time lagged, flickering as past and future overlapped. Even Council ships, those outside the direct blast, felt the effects. Their hulls groaned as gravitational forces beyond comprehension threatened to rip them apart, and yet the prototype ship remained. Not only did it withstand the attack, it adapted. The ship did not resist the rift's pull. Instead, it embraced it. The hull shifted, warping like liquid metal, its very structure bending and reforming as if in harmony with the chaos. For the first time, the prototype ship made a move that could almost be called aggressive. It lunged forward, not through space, but through the fractured reality itself. One moment, it was outside the gravitational vortex. The next, it was inside, moving freely within the chaotic maelstrom as if it belonged there. And then it emerged, directly inside the Council's formation. Panic erupted. The prototype had just broken every known law of space-time. No ship could survive in the unstable core of a reality rift. No species had ever engineered a way to navigate such distortions, let alone use them as a means of attack. And yet humanity had. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, their greatest superweapon had failed. The admirals knew then they had never been superior. Humanity had never been weak. The reason humans had never wielded these technologies before was not because they lacked the intelligence or resources. It was because they had chosen not to. Until now. The prototype ship, still unharmed, pulsed once more. The Council fleet watched in helpless horror as the very rift they had unleashed, one designed to destroy anything within its grasp, now turned against them. It obeyed the Terran vessel. The distorted space around the ship solidified into jagged, shifting shards, forming an immense gravitational tide that wrapped itself around the remaining warships like a living thing. One by one, ships were torn apart, their hulls crumbling like sand under an ocean wave. Some tried to run, activating emergency FTL drives, but the prototype anticipated their escape. Before their engines could cycle, the gravitational tide twisted, forcing them back into real space. And then, with merciless precision, the prototype ship's dark energy pulses erased them one by one. Desperation took hold. The highest-ranking admiral of the Council, a leader who had once mocked humanity for their primitive vessels, now stared, in pure terror, at the incoming reports. Over 70% of the fleet had been annihilated. The remaining ships had lost critical systems. Their weapons were useless. Their shields meant nothing. Their strongest strategies had failed. There was only one option left. The admiral swallowed his pride. The words felt like poison, but they were the only thing that might save what remained of the Council's military forces. Broadcast surrender. The order was sent. Across every remaining warship, distress signals were activated. Universal emergency transmissions were pushed onto every known channel. They pleaded. They begged. We surrender. We surrender. Do not fire. And then, silence. The prototype ship did not respond. For the first time, the Council fleet realized something far worse than losing the battle. They were not negotiating with a species that fought for power. They were facing a species that no longer considered them worthy of acknowledgement, and that was a fate more terrifying than death. The vast expanse of space, once teeming with the glowing formations of the Council's grand fleet, had become a graveyard. Wreckage drifted in slow, eerie silence, the shattered remains of what had once been an armada powerful enough to command the stars. Fires still burned in the vacuum, stubborn embers of failing reactors flickering against the blackness of space. The Council's forces, once arrogant, once laughing, had been reduced to scattered survivors and silent wrecks. Yet, amidst the destruction, the prototype warship remained untouched. It drifted through the battlefield like a specter, moving, with an intelligence that defied explanation. It was not piloted in the conventional sense. No heat signatures, no biological readings, no transmissions. To the Council, it was as if the vessel thought for itself, adapting in ways no artificial intelligence in the known galaxy ever had. And, still, it said nothing. The Council's desperate surrender transmissions echoed across the void, repeating on every emergency frequency. We surrender. We surrender. Do not fire. Their pleas continued, but the prototype ship gave no response. The admiral of the surviving forces, one of the oldest, most respected leaders in the Council, sat frozen in his command seat, hands trembling. He had survived wars, uprisings, and entire species purged from existence, yet nothing had ever instilled this kind of fear in him before. He turned to his officers. Some were praying, whispering in languages long forgotten. Others sat motionless, staring at the ship on the screen with vacant eyes, as if their minds had already broken under the sheer impossibility of what they had witnessed. Finally, the admiral forced himself to speak. His voice was hoarse, weak. Any response? The comms officer checked again. He swallowed hard. None. Silence. That was all they received. No demands, no conditions, no interest in their surrender. The realization dawned slowly, like a nightmare that refused to end. The prototype ship was not here for negotiations. It had not been deployed to conquer. It was something else entirely. The admiral's voice broke the oppressive silence. Get me command. We have to warn them. His officers scrambled to comply, re-establishing long-range communications. But before they could send their distress signal, the ship moved again. For the first time, the prototype displayed intent. The void around it rippled. Not an energy charge, not an explosion, something deeper. A shift in reality itself. The hull of the prototype seemed to melt, its dark structure becoming translucent, revealing something beneath. For a brief moment, those watching from the shattered fleet could see beyond the veil of its hull. What they saw was not technology. It was something else, a construct of war, but not built by hands, not forged in factories. It pulsed like a living thing, yet radiated the cold precision of a weapon designed for one purpose: judgment. The Council's surviving ships had weapons aimed, but no one dared fire. They all knew it would be useless. Then, without a sound, the prototype turned away. The officers in the Council's command bridge held their breath. Was this a sign of mercy? Was it sparing them? For a moment, hope flickered. Perhaps it had received their surrender. Perhaps humanity was willing to accept their plea. And then, it happened. The entire battlefield began to change. At first, it was subtle. Wreckage that had once floated aimlessly shifted, drawn toward an unseen force. Then, the surviving ship's sensors erupted in a cascade of warnings: gravitational distortions, warped physics, the same anomalies the prototype had used to erase entire warships earlier. But this time, the anomaly was not singular. It was expanding. The shattered remains of the fleet began to collapse inward, as if space itself had decided to consume what was left. The wreckage was pulled into the growing anomaly, metal warping and folding in ways that defied reality. Ships that had once commanded the stars were compressed into nothingness, their atoms scattered into the abyss. The admiral's blood ran cold. This was not a weapon in the traditional sense. This was erasure. Total annihilation. The prototype ship was not allowing any trace of the battle to remain. Every ship, every destroyed vessel, every fractured hull was being systematically erased, as if it had never existed at all. The admiral turned to his crew, eyes wide with horror. "Reverse engines! Get us out of here, now!" The remaining council ships fled, engaging every emergency drive system available. Some made it, others didn't. The gravitational collapse reached faster than light speeds, catching ships even as they entered hyperspace. One by one, vessels were pulled back, screaming into the anomaly. Not destroyed, not shattered, removed. Only a handful of ships managed to escape the battlefield entirely, barely slipping past the event horizon before it consumed the last remnants of the Council's greatest fleet, and then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The space where the battle had taken place was empty. Not a trace remained. No debris, no wreckage, no evidence that the engagement had ever occurred. It was as if the Council fleet had never been there at all. And in the distance, the prototype ship was gone. The surviving ships limped through hyperspace, racing back toward Council space. Some had lost communications. Some had lost entire sections of their crews, their minds breaking from what they had witnessed. But those who survived would never forget. Humanity had revealed a truth the galaxy had never considered. The species they had mocked, the species they had seen as weak, had returned with a weapon beyond comprehension, and they had chosen not to obliterate the Council. No, what they had done was far worse. They had erased the battle itself. They had erased the defeat. They had erased everything, because for humanity, this was not a war. It was a warning. The Council's surviving fleet fled through hyperspace, their ships damaged, their crews broken. The once mighty warships of the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy had been reduced to whispering wrecks, limping through the void like battered prey that had barely escaped a predator's maw. Inside the command bridge of the Dovaris, the Council's last surviving dreadnought, Admiral Selvar Karn sat in silence. His eyes, once sharp and full of the confidence of a seasoned strategist, were now hollow. He had seen entire fleets burn, had ordered the extermination of entire species, but nothing had prepared him for this. Not for a warship that did not obey the laws of reality, not for a weapon that did not conquer, but erased. A cold dread settled in his chest. This was not a matter of military loss. This was something deeper, something far worse. His second-in-command, a hardened warrior named Volth Mar, finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Admiral, what do we tell the High Council?" Karn exhaled slowly. That was the question, wasn't it? How did one explain that an entire battle had been erased? That one ship, one single ship, had obliterated a force capable of cracking planetary defenses in minutes? He looked around at his crew. They were afraid to even speak the name of their enemy. Humanity. A species they had mocked, banished, destroyed. They had laughed at Earth's primitive fleets, had scorned their early failures in interstellar combat. They had ridiculed their first warships, calling them clumsy metal boxes, unworthy of even being classified as war machines. And yet, the prototype ship had rewritten everything. The Council had believed that war was a matter of numbers, of firepower, of control over space and resources. But what they had witnessed was beyond technology, beyond mere strategy. The warship had wielded something else entirely. Something no empire could resist. The whispers among the surviving crew had already begun. They murmured about dark science, about forbidden technology, about something more than just a warship. Some speculated it wasn't even built by human hands. Karn clenched his fists. "Enough. Silence," he commanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We do not speculate. We do not panic. We focus on the facts." But the facts were terrifying. The prototype had annihilated their most advanced fleet. It had manipulated space itself, wielding a power the Council could not understand. It had left no wreckage, no evidence, no trace of its attack, and the most horrifying fact of all, it had let them escape. It could have erased them too. It could have wiped them from existence without a single effort. And yet, it had allowed some survivors to return. Why? Was it a calculated move? A show of power? A message? Or was it something far, far worse? Karn turned to his bridge crew. "Prepare a secure transmission. We need to warn the High Council immediately." The comms officer hesitated. "Admiral, we already tried sending messages during the retreat. Something is interfering with our signals." Karn's gut twisted. "Interfering? How?" The officer gulped, adjusting the control panels. "Every long-range communication is being absorbed. We send a message, and it vanishes. No trace, no bounce-back signal. As if it never existed." A deep, horrible realization settled over them. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't jamming. This was something else. Karn leaned forward, his voice dangerously calm. "Are you telling me the prototype is still affecting us? Even now?" The comms officer gave a shaky nod. "Yes, sir." Silence. Then, from the tactical station, another voice broke the stillness. "Admiral, we have a problem." Karn turned to the officer. "Explain." The officer's screen displayed something impossible, a stellar map showing the region of space where the battle had occurred. Except it was blank. Not just the battlefield itself. The entire system was gone. The Admiral's blood ran cold. "Clarify." The officer's hands shook as he zoomed in on the coordinates. "Sir, according to our data, that star system never existed." The bridge went deathly silent. It was impossible. A star system could not be erased. Even if a weapon destroyed it, remnants would remain. Gravity distortions, wreckage, radiation spikes. But the readings showed nothing. Not a star. Not a single piece of debris. Not even an empty sector where the system should have been. It was as if the Council's entire fleet had fought a battle in a place that had never existed. Karn forced himself to breathe. His mind raced through possibilities. Was this a trick? A form of advanced signal warfare? A manipulation of records? No. That wasn't it. This wasn't just an illusion. This was reality itself being rewritten. A dark, horrifying thought crept into his mind. What if this prototype ship wasn't just a warship? What if it wasn't just a weapon? What if it was something worse? What if it was an executioner? A being of war so advanced that it had moved beyond simple destruction, and instead erased history itself. His voice was a whisper. "What have we awakened?" The question lingered in the air like a curse, because somewhere in the void, beyond the reach of any scanner or sensor, the prototype ship was still there, watching, waiting. And Karn knew one terrible truth. This was not over. It was only just beginning. The Dovaris drifted through the void, a broken relic of the once invincible Council Armada. Inside its command bridge, Admiral Selvar Karn stood frozen, staring at the empty coordinates on the stellar map. His crew waited, eyes darting between their malfunctioning consoles and their leader. No one wanted to speak first, because to voice the truth was to acknowledge the horror of it. The battlefield was gone, not destroyed, not even abandoned, erased. No debris, no gravitational disturbances, no remnants of the hundreds of warships that had once filled that sector. The star system itself had been wiped from existence, as if it had never been there in the first place. This was beyond any known weapon, beyond any war doctrine. It was an undoing of reality itself. Karn forced himself to focus. His military instincts screamed at him to analyze, adapt, act. But how did one react to something so completely outside the realm of logic? He turned to his science officer, a Zalathi named Drivak, whose normally pale green complexion had turned a sickly gray. Tell me this is an error. Some kind of anomaly in our sensors. Drivak swallowed hard, adjusting the controls in front of him. Admiral, I've run the scans 3 times. Our instruments are not malfunctioning. He hesitated before continuing, his voice barely above a whisper. That sector of space, it no longer exists. Karn's hands curled into fists. That's impossible. Drivak's voice trembled. I know. And yet. He brought up a comparative star map. The previous records, before the battle, showed a thriving system. A yellow dwarf star, 3 planets, and a moon where the Council had stationed orbital defenses. Now, nothing. Even the distant pulsars behind the region had shifted, as if the very fabric of space had been rewritten. A creeping dread filled the bridge. Karn turned sharply toward his second-in-command, Volth Mar. Are we receiving any transmissions from the rest of the fleet? Mar hesitated. His fingers hovered over the console before he finally answered. Negative, Admiral. We received distress calls during the retreat. But now? He shook his head. It's like they never existed. The silence was deafening. A fleet of thousands. An entire star system. Gone. Karn's mind worked furiously. He had fought countless battles, had witnessed entire planets burned to ash. But this was something else entirely. His species had ruled the stars for millennia. They had subjugated entire civilizations, broken empires, erased cultures that dared to resist. But never before had they encountered something that could erase them in return. A single ship, a human ship, a prototype they had mocked, a weapon they had assumed was a failure, and now they were the failures. Karn exhaled sharply. We have to warn the High Council. Mar shifted uncomfortably. Admiral, if we tell them we lost our fleet to a single ship, they'll execute us before we finish our report. He wasn't wrong. The Council did not tolerate failure. Karn clenched his jaw. They won't execute us if we bring them a solution. Mar's mandibles clicked. A solution? To what, Admiral? A weapon that can erase entire systems? A ship that can defy every known law of war? What exactly do you suggest? Karn turned toward Drivak. Tell me everything we know about this prototype. Every rumor, every piece of data. Drivak hesitated, then began pulling up classified reports. Project Silencer. The file name alone sent chills down Karn's spine. This was more than just a prototype. Warship, Drivak began. According to recovered intelligence, Earth wasn't just building a new kind of battleship. They were experimenting with an entirely new type of warfare. Karn narrowed his eyes. Explain. Drivak swallowed. It's not just a ship. It's a convergence of multiple sciences. Advanced AI, exotic matter, experimental spatial physics, and something more. He tapped the screen, bringing up fragments of intercepted human transmissions. Project Silencer. Does not fire conventional weapons. Project Silencer does not conquer. Project Silencer ends conflicts before they begin. Karn's blood turned to ice. Ends conflicts? Drivak's voice trembled. We thought it meant overwhelming force, that humans had developed a new type of planetary assault weapon. But what if... He trailed off, unwilling to say the words. Karn finished for him. What if they meant removing their enemies from reality itself? The implications were horrifying. What if this ship wasn't designed to fight wars, but to erase the very concept of opposition? What if it didn't just destroy fleets, but removed entire civilizations from history? Karn felt something he had never felt before. Not anger, not frustration. Fear. Deep, primal fear. Admiral! The desperate call from the tactical officer snapped him out of his thoughts. We have an incoming ship. The bridge erupted into motion. Screens flickered to life. Alarms blared. Karn's voice was razor-sharp. Identify! The officer's mandibles twitched. Unknown, it just appeared. Karn's breath caught in his throat. A black silhouette materialized in the void. No energy signatures, no engine trails, a void darker than space itself. Then, transmission incoming. A deep, emotionless voice filled the bridge. This is Commander Silas of the UNSC Eradicator. You have trespassed in restricted space. There will be no negotiation. There will be no retreat. The Council's reign ends now. Karn's hands trembled as he stared at the black warship on the screen. It was just sitting there, but he knew it could erase them at any moment. The officers around him broke into hushed murmurs. No one moved, no one dared to breathe, because they all knew the truth. There was no fighting this. There was no victory. The only question left was, would the prototype let them live, or had it already decided to remove them from history next? Admiral Silvar Karn had never felt so powerless. His mind, trained for centuries in the art of war, strategy, and control, now struggled to grasp the sheer scale of what was happening. He had commanded fleets that subjugated entire worlds, had led armadas that crushed rebellions before they had a chance to rise. He had seen civilizations burn, watched enemies beg for mercy, and he had always known, that the Council stood as the supreme force in the galaxy. Yet now, in the face of this one human warship, that certainty had been shattered. The Eradicator remained motionless in the void, a dark monolith against the starlit abyss. No weapon systems were visible, no energy readings, no sign of traditional engines, and yet, the Doverese systems screamed warnings of imminent annihilation. Karn forced his breath to steady. He needed to think. If he hesitated now, they were dead. Open a channel, he ordered. His communications officer, a Sarlian named Hekran, gave a nervous glance, but obeyed. Channel open, Admiral. Karn stepped forward. His voice, honed by years of command, was sharp but controlled. This is Admiral Silvar Karn of the Council Navy. We acknowledge your strength. But know this, we are not without power of our own. If you choose to fire upon us, our Council will retaliate in full. The silence stretched. No response. Karn's mandibles tightened. He continued. I propose a parley. There is no need for further bloodshed. The battle is over. A moment passed. Then, incorrect. The voice of Commander Silas filled the bridge once more, cold and unwavering. The battle is not over. The war is over. The Council's reign ends now. Karn's breath caught. His officers whispered among themselves, mandibles clicking, eyes darting between one another in barely contained panic. The Council cannot be undone, Karn growled. We have ruled for millennia. And for millennia, you have bled the stars dry, Silas replied. You have enslaved, eradicated, subjugated. But there is one thing you failed to understand. A pause. Then, in a voice as calm as it was terrifying, humanity does not forget. Humanity does not forgive. Karn's gut twisted. He had known humans were dangerous. He had read the reports of their relentless adaptability, their refusal to surrender even in the face of overwhelming force. But this was something different. This was not a civilization that fought for power. This was a civilization that fought for retribution. Karn clenched his jaw. So this is genocide, then? A culling of the Council's people? Silas's reply was immediate. No. This is correction. You were given chances. You refused peace. You slaughtered without mercy. You believed yourselves untouchable. That belief ends today. A cold realization sank into Karn's bones. The humans weren't trying to win a war. They were making sure there would never be another one. His mind raced through possibilities. Escape? Impossible. Attack? Suicide? Surrender? Would they even accept it? Admiral, incoming energy surge. Karn snapped his head toward the tactical officer. The screen flickered, displaying impossible readings. The Eradicator still showed no visible weapon systems, no traditional energy signatures. And yet, the space around it was bending. A tear in reality itself. Karn had seen planets destroyed before. He had seen stars collapse into neutron husks. But this was something else entirely. This was unmaking. His officers stared, paralyzed. None of their weapons, none of their technology could stand against this. He had led armadas that had conquered entire sectors. But at this moment, he was nothing more than a man staring into an abyss that stared back. Karn swallowed, then spoke, the hardest words of his life. "Commander Silas, what do you want?" For the first time, Silas paused. Then came his reply. "Surrender." The word carried a weight unlike any Karn had ever known. Surrender. For the Council, such a thing was unthinkable, unacceptable. To yield was to invite extermination. And yet, what choice did he have? Karn exhaled slowly. He turned toward his officers, his crew, the last remnants of what had once been an unstoppable armada. Their expressions told him everything. Fear, despair. They had already lost. Karn closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, he was no longer a warlord, no longer an admiral of the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. He was simply a man standing before the inevitable. He took a deep breath and gave the order that would change galactic history forever. Transmit our surrender. Silence. Then, the Eradicator remained still for several long seconds. Then its form began to shimmer, its outline distorting against the fabric of space itself. Silas's final words echoed across the bridge. "Your fleet is gone. Your empire is over. The Council's reign dies today. Remember this, Karn. Humanity does not start wars, but we will end them." The transmission cut. The Eradicator vanished into the abyss. No explosion, no trace, no energy signature, simply gone. Karn's hands trembled as he slumped into his command chair. They had survived, but the galaxy would never be the same. For the first time in history, the Council was no longer the apex predator. For the first time in history, the Council had been forced to surrender, and across the galaxy, in the shadows of every system, every empire, every civilization, whispers began to spread. Not of war, not of conquest, but of fear. Fear of the name that now haunted the void humanity.